All right. David asked me, my name's John Denning. I'm the State Forest Manager at Potomac and Garrett State Forests up in western Maryland. I've been a forester for the state of Maryland since 1987, and I've had the pleasure of working on public lands for pretty much the balance of my career, actually. I did a little bit of private land work when I first started out, but I've worked on state forest lands for the majority of my career, and most of that has been in western Maryland. The assistant forest manager at Green Ridge at one time, as well as at Savage River State Forest, and presently the manager at Potomac Garrett. Just a little bit of background. David asked me to talk about some of the habitat work that we were doing with drummer funds. That was kind of the context of the original invite. And I started out to do that, and I thought, well, we've done some neat stuff with drummer funds in the local chapter, but I really wanted to take the chance to talk to you specifically about the forest management planning process, you know, and okay, I can do that. Yeah, all right, not the most zippy stuff, but really, forest management planning process to this audience, I think, is very important. We've heard some information from some of the other speakers about other players at the table, and I think this particular audience here, the Rough Grouse Society folks, may not have a real good following and understanding of what we do when we are managing the state forests. Bob and Bill had referenced management plans. State forests, we do management plans. We have management plans and have been using those management plans for quite a while. So I'm going to talk about the state forest management planning process first, and then I'm going to back up and I'm going to finish up because anybody that knows me knows I like to brag what we do on the state forest. We've got some pretty cool stuff going on the ground, and I will take a few minutes to talk about the fun stuff. Before I dive into it, as a forester and a grouse hunter, I think it's important to all of us that we recognize one of the most important tools in our pocket for developing this early successional habitat is our timber harvesting programs. And a couple of folks alluded to it earlier. We are very fortunate in Maryland to have really active timber harvesting programs on our state forest lands. WMAs, you guys have been a little bit slow. They're catching up. But the state forests have had a very aggressive and very well-balanced forest management plans that have involved timber harvesting for a very long time. Mark is cutting on an area management regulation program. The other state forests are using what we call volume regulation, slightly different, but we are harvesting a given volume. And that's what's creating some of your best grouse habitat out there. It doesn't cost us anything. We're getting paid to have that done. Those big red oak logs that are being harvested, the loggers are buying, they're buying it at a competitive rate, and the end result is acres and acres of valuable management. Okay, really good habitat. A couple real important things to realize is that we're not the only ones out there. There's a lot of competing users, a lot of competing demands on these state forests. The bicycling community, the off-road vehicles, wintertime in Garrett County, snowmobilers. Everybody's a hiker. We've got winter use. Darn, I got two versions of this, and I did have a grouse hunter in it. I think I got the second series. The bird hunters are out there, but one of the smallest voices in the group, okay? You got to be at the table. So we're charged with managing the state lands for a large audience, a large number of folks with competing uses. And of those folks I had up here, back up one. That's forward one. Of all those user groups up there, can you imagine? Not too many of those folks are interested in our silvicultural program, in cutting timber. The hikers aren't very interested in it. The bikers don't want to see it. Our off-road vehicle folks. The slide that I did have did pop a bird hunter up there, and he's the only one that's going to be interested in it, you folks, okay? You're going to blow my whole show there.
Wrong button, man.
I did it. I blew it. All right, we're winging it here. Bring me back.
It's coming.
All right. Bottom line is we're charged with managing that state forest for a lot of user groups. How do we get there? We have a very regimented management planning process. The state forests have had what we call a 10-year management plan for a long, long time. We've guided our direction on the state forest was guided by these 10-year plans. I think the last 10-year plan for the state forest was done in the late 90s, and we were long overdue. Since then, we've revisited this process, and it's now become what we'll call our Sustainable Forest Management Plan for the state forest. Kick me up one. Okay. And the reason we have these sustainable forest management plans has kind of come about for a number of reasons, but one of which is I want to let you folks know that the state forests, our state forests, are certified. You going to go with me?
Just the left mouse.
Okay, I'm with you. I won't back up. The Maryland State Forests are certified as being sustainable managed by two leading independent nonprofit organizations that certify forest lands. Anybody know what certified forestry is? Let me go with this. How about that symbol? Has anybody seen that symbol? Anybody been to Lowe's recently, bought a board or a 2x4 or any lumber? Look in the back of your catalogs. You'll see this symbol. How about this symbol? Okay. The Sustainable Forestry Initiative and the Forest Stewardship Council are two independent third-party organizations that are recognized internationally as certifying programs that validate, if you will, forest management programs, saying that they are sustainably managed. And that sustainable management assures that there's an economic return on your forest, and most importantly, an ecological concern or constraints within your forest management plan, and it also factors in the social side of our forest management. So those user groups that want to ride out there, they're factored in, but so is the economy. Okay, we're talking about sustained yield that turns over wood products, and very importantly, the ecological values are considered as well. Now, I tell you that we're certified. This is a very significant thing for us. It requires a regular audit. We're audited every year by these organizations. They come together and do an audit of our program. So they look at what we do on the ground, and they say, you've made promises, and you put a management plan together. Are you, in fact, doing that? And what that's allowed us to do is continue to manage the forest as we have and we are today. We're allowed to harvest timber because we basically have what I'll consider the good housekeeping seal of approval, that we're doing things right. We are managing the forest sustainably. Those environmentalists, if you will, the folks that stand there and say no cutting trees, I don't understand how no cutting of any trees is environmentally right. Okay? It's a preservationist attitude I think a lot of folks have fallen into. They don't accept the fact that that's not sustainable. There's a lot of species out there. Tom had alluded to about a dozen bird species that are very dependent on the silvicultural programs on the state forest. That's sustainably managed for the ecological values. I want you to know that that's going on right now. It's expensive for us to do. We are audited every year, but it has given us the right to manage the forest without too much interruption. It seemed like we spent an awful lot of time in the prior years combating opposition to cutting trees on the state forest. We don't do that anymore. We've gone through the process. We've developed sustainable forest management plans for all of the state forests. Basically, that's a guidance document. It's developed under the principles outlined by those two programs. They require that you address a wide range of forest values. And the fact that we do that gives us the opportunity to manage the land. The Sustainable Forest Management Plan insists or demonstrates that environmentally sound, sustainably managed forests can contribute to local and regional economies. When we cut those trees, there's value added to the community like crazy. Okay, let's not hide behind that. That's income brought into the state of Maryland. The state forests don't get to see all that money. It goes into a general fund within the department. It used to be the Forest and Park Reserve Fund. The parks and the forest both operated from that. 25% of our receipts go to the county in lieu of taxes. There's some legislation on the wing right now for that to change. Stay tuned and watch where that's going. That could be dangerous. But there's an economic value. And more importantly, and most importantly, at the same time, we're protecting significant and unique natural communities and elements of biological diversity, which include this early successional habitat that we're talking about. This sustainable plan is a guidance document. The couple things that I like to think that it does for me, two key things. It provides me some guidance and direction for our management. Somebody comes into my office and says, hey, I want to put together a bicycle trail, and we're going to run it up through here and out through here and out through here. You know, I don't ride a bicycle that much anymore. Used to a little bit. So I'm not real keen on that particular user group personally, because it's not my thing. But as a land manager, I have to listen to it. And the first thing I do is go to this plan and say, no, wait a minute, where are you looking and what are you proposing? Man, that's not consistent with our sustainable management plan. You're going to go through some very important environmental areas. That's not appropriate use. So it gives me a quick and ready reference. The other thing that it does, it gives me direction. As a forest manager, we develop another plan, and it's our annual work plan. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But it's basically, just as it sounds, the outline for a year's work. And by going back to this document, it helps me develop that year's work plan. A couple of things important within our sustainable plan, I think that just this group would like to have you have a little bit of information about, is what we'll kind of refer to as the forest zoning. In general, the state forests are large blocks of forest land. The majority of our Potomac Garrett State Forest is forested. 1% is open land, very little. So we're talking about a huge block of forest that on the surface is pretty insignificant. It's all forested, you know. But if you look at the critical parts of that and you break it down into some of the more, what we'll call high conservation value forests, for example, the old growth areas that Tom had alluded to earlier, we do have old growth forests on Potomac and Garrett State Forest. About 7 areas that comprise about 400 acres of nearly 18,000. So not a lot. It's pretty significant. Those communities are very important, old growth. Like Tom had also mentioned the wetlands. 6,000 acres, Tom, in Garrett County. Quite a number of those occur on the Garrett State Forest, Potomac and Garrett State Forest. Those wetlands are incredibly significant, very high conservation value. We want to protect those wetlands for the wetland benefits and the buffers and riparian areas that feed them. So those forests have some other resource values that are a little bit different than just your average upland forest, all right? So in general, we break the forest down as general management area, typical upland forest, and high conservation value forests. Those high conservation value forests might provide protection for rare, threatened, and endangered species, the old growth communities, the wetlands, or what have you. And just roughly, that's about a 45-55% mix. Mark, do you know on Green Ridge? About the same, right? Savage River's right in that same window. We used to say 50%, 50-50. It falls just a little bit heavier to the general zone. So that in mind, approximately 55% of the state forest is open for silviculture. We can do some management in these other special management areas. They are open to management. But the management of those areas is very specific to that high conservation value within there. For example, if it's an old growth community, you couldn't hardly see clear cutting in an old growth forest, right? I mean, not to insult you, but that's extreme. In the wetlands, there may be some management that we can do, like has been going on over at Mount Nebo. That's specific for that habitat type. That harvest wasn't necessarily to yield an economic return. In fact, we had to pay the loggers to come take the wood out. It was management for management's sake for a species in need of conservation, okay? The annual work plan is the next step. Again, Forest Service, we do management plans, baby. We plan. Plan your work. Work your plan. That's a year in review. And I wanted to bring this up to this particular group because as a group of folks that typically comes to us and says, hey, I'd really like to do something on a state forest. You know, we've got this great project. We got some money from the Drummer Fund. Let's get something happening. And what do I have to do? I have to put up a big yield sign. Time out, guys. You got to understand my process here is very involved. Our annual work plan, to develop an annual work plan takes about a year and a half. Right now, beginning in January, I'm sitting down preparing the work that will occur in our fiscal year 2017. That's a year and a half away. Our fiscal year starts in July. Throughout the course of the next year and a half, this management plan will go through various processes. And just blasting through here briefly, the three things, or one thing I'd really like to bring out is the three-tiered review of this management plan, okay? About July of this year, I will have had a draft plan put together. Okay, I'll have sat down with the guys from the wildlife management group over at NEBO. Rick Latshaw is the regional habitat biologist, and a lot of our other counterparts within DNR, and we'll put together a bunch of ideas, and we'll develop a proposal, if you will. And in July, we'll sit down as a group with our interdisciplinary team from within DNR. There's representatives from the Fisheries Division, from the Wildlife Division, from our Heritage Division, Water Resources folks, Recreation folks, foresters within the region. The whole myriad of folks within the department get to look at what we're proposing. And they review it from their particular discipline to say that's appropriate for the land, and it's good, and it's managing the right resource. If we're managing for a rare, threatened, and endangered species, which, if you can believe it, we actually do some management specifically for that, which is pretty exciting. The heritage biologist weighs in on that. If we're looking to do some management work, which we have, and I'll talk a little bit about it, the wildlife biologist says, yeah, that's consistent, that's good management. I'm not a woodcock guy, so I'm going to go to Bill or Bob and Rick and say, hey, look, would like to do this. Is this consistent? They review it in the ID team review. Later on in the fall, that same plan is presented to our Citizens Advisory Committee. And what's that? Citizens Advisory Committees exist for all 3 state forests. And I'm talking about the state forests in western Maryland being Potomac, Garrett State Forest, Savage River, and Green Ridge. We have a board or a committee that is a group of folks that are let's say, cross-sectional slice of the user groups that use the state forest. We have a fisherman. We have a hunting representative on the State Forest Advisory Committee, recreational users, recreational professionals, local business is represented, economic interests represented, the logging community. We do a lot of timber harvesting. We want to hear from our loggers. Does this plan suit you? Is it appropriate? A cross-sectional slice, a small group. There's about a dozen folks overall on that committee. They review the plan, and that allows me to sit down in a small group setting and go through this plan and hear pretty much from the voice of the state forest users, and they review that. Then, and most importantly, it comes to public review. In December, some of you folks may have commented. I know Linda has been receiving those. Dave gets a notice. It says we're up for public review. It's a 30-day web posting. That annual work plan is put up for public comment, and it's very important that you folks recognize that that's out there and take advantage of it. Dave's been good about that. It gets sent out to the general public, to the news media. It's posted. Dave's been good about sending that out. Several members from the general population and membership here have commented. I've received comments from several members, and I know Linda, as a biologist, has had pertinent comments to our plan. The key thing is realize that it's there. That whole group of other users earlier is there, and they're responding. 3 things I want you to think about and take home from this little conversation. Recognize that FSC and SFI certified sustainable forestry is going on your state forests. You'll see those symbols out in the lumber yards. It may not mean a lot to you now, but what I call that is our good housekeeping seal of approval. When the so-called environmental community, the preservationists, the tree huggers that don't want anything harvested, tell us and try to make an issue that we're damaging the forest by cutting those trees, I'm here to tell you that we're not. This is sustainably managed forest land. This is not the government. This is not Big Brother telling you I'm doing okay. Third parties accepted by both the timber industry as well as, and more importantly, the environmental community. FSC is considered the gold standard within the environmental community. And they've recognized our program as being solid. And then the annual work planning process requires us to plan about 1.5 years out. So please accept that. Plan ahead with us. If you have a project or a proposal for one of the state forests, sit down, give me a shout, give Mark a shout, give Wade Dorsey a shout. Say, look, we got this idea. Don't expect it to happen this summer. If the drummer fund is fat this year and we want to get some money spent, it can be very difficult to do that. Mark's going to talk a little bit about how we kind of tiptoe around that a little bit. And it's not sneaky, but it's just good planning on our part. But in general, a new project takes 1.5 years before we can put it on the ground. And most importantly, the annual work plan includes a 3-tiered review process. Internal DNR, a cross-sectional slice from an advisory committee, and the public review process. I will say as a whole, the hunting community has not been at the table. They haven't been at the table for a very long time. ORV community, buddy, they're there. They're putting big money into their four-wheelers, and they don't have a place to ride, and they're coming and they're wanting places to ride. The bicycling community, they're out there. They're wanting places to ride. They're making places to ride. They're demanding it. The other user groups are coming. The hunting community, based on the slides probably that showed earlier, we are dropping off in numbers, so we've got to make sure that that voice is heard. Come to the table. Okay, give me just a moment. I'll talk about a little bit about some of the good stuff that we are doing. That was a really cool double rainbow, by the way, on that slide. Does it show up? Okay, I can't see the colors from where I'm standing. RGS habitat projects on the Potomac and Garrett state forests. A couple of things that we've done out there in cooperation with the local chapter, the Backbone Mountain chapter. We held a really neat field day here. This has been actually a few years back, 2011, I believe. The chapter was fairly new and wanted to get out and really jump on the ground and make an appearance. And we did a couple of acres of, this happens to be red spruce, native red spruce. It's actually considered a rare plant in the state of Maryland. Extremely uncommon. We have the largest stand of red spruce on the Garrett State Forest. Hazard guess to the size of it? Anybody seen it? 4 acres. Not too big. 2 parent trees. Comes from 2 parent trees. You can actually still see there's 2 individual trees that all the seed has rained down. We're managing that stand. It's considered an ecologically sensitive area, and we've done hack and squirt work in there to allow that red spruce to continue to grow. It provides some great winter habitat and great winter cover. The chapter planted the trees. We get a couple of acres with a school group, herbicided the site the spring before or the fall before with the help from our wildlife division. Laid out the planting rows, and we came in and hand planted really nice red spruce planting trees. It's a great outreach effort, as all of you know, pretty much what we do in field work. Oftentimes the outreach probably outweighs maybe sometimes the actual habitat specifically created at the time. This will have a long time to go before it's in the hunting value, if you will. 10, 15 years, we're going to see some neat stuff. But in 10 or 15 years, there's a bunch of fourth graders who are going to be entering college, and hopefully they're going to remember spending a day with RGS, a hunting organization, a conservation organization that gave them a chance to put trees in the ground. That was neat. We followed up the following year with a similar project. This happens to be a couple thousand shrubs. It was various dogwood species that we planted as a border cut or a border along an old abandoned field. Again, this was pretty much couched as an outreach program. Good habitat. If you can look in the back, you can see there is awesome grouse habitat back there. There's block cuts. This was a series of patch cuts that was done about 7 years ago. It's right now. The deer have really beat us up on this, so it set it back a little bit. But the edge of the field, we put some herbaceous, some shrub mixes in here, various dogwoods, and then just beyond that, we also put another strip. There's about 600 red spruce in there as well. The conifer plantations that we have on the state forest, pretty much on Potomac and Garrett State Forest, were planted in the 40s. Some of them are remnants from the Civilian Conservation Corps. Most were actually planted after. It's all pretty well mature or maturing. We don't have a lot of winter cover. Some of our conifer cover, most of our conifer cover occurs in our hemlock stands in the stream drainages. And many of you may be aware of the hemlock woolly adelgid. It's an insect pest that's threatening that particular winter cover. So this spruce cover could provide some very significant thermal benefits in the future. It was interesting on this particular day, the chapter had such a good time with the first year's planting. We said, we're going to go out. That same school teacher was very interested. I got a whole new group of kids. We'll be glad to work with you. Lined it all up. Costs a lot to get those kids out. We have to keep that in mind. If you're doing a project sometime, it might not be a bad idea to budget for the school buses. I know in Garrett County they have to actually pay for the bus driver. And it is a significant expense. The day of the planting, they were calling for severe thunderstorms. Actually, we were watching the weather as the week rolled on, and we had to make the call 2 days before the planting to schedule with the driver. And it was killing us because it was beautiful like this up to this day, and the forecast was severe thunderstorms coming into the area. So we called the teacher in charge of the program. She said, John, I don't know what to do. I said, look, we're going to be there. This chapter's coming. We're planting trees. We'd love to have you. She said, I really don't know what to do. She said, I think I'm going to have to beg off. She said, I can't see having that many kids standing on an open, exposed field at high elevation with severe thunderstorms with a dibble bar in their hand. I'm with you. I'm with you. I was a little more comfortable letting her bow out. We had a great day. We planted all the trees. The rain came literally as we were packing the tools up on the UTV to haul out that day. It was remarkable. The chapter folks really turned out in great numbers, put the trees in the ground, tubed everything, and worked like dogs that day because we were counting on a whole lot more help. And it was unfortunate on one hand that the kids couldn't participate, but on the other hand, when it rained as we were walking out, everybody had a sigh of relief. This is a little bit of what Lynn and I have talked about. This is the gravy. This project here is part of the tree planting effort that went on those two other previous slides. In the same general area, there are a couple of timber harvests that were conducted. Part of our best management plan, BMPs for logging require that the landings are stabilized. And we stabilize with a mix that is attractive to wildlife. It's basically a pasture mix. It has some legumes. It's a grass legume mix that we've worked out with our wildlife division. We don't do a lot of maintenance on the landings. Once they're stabilized, they are what they are, and they'll revegetate. Well, this particular area, there's a road that goes through here and connects about 3 different log landings, part of which is a handicapped hunter accessible road. And we thought, well, while we're doing the cover work up here on top, and we've got several other landings on the area, so we've got habitat on its way, let's go ahead and maintain and do some management on those landings. So we did use a grain drill in there. We took the Wildlife Division's grain drill in there, and we seeded the area using the RGS clover mix. It came in really nicely. It's a really nice bed of clover in there. Now, the problem with these kind of sites, it's a maintenance issue. I mean, you might walk in there now. We're going to make every effort to mow these things. We have to mow them twice a year to maintain that clover base in a very rich, thick clover. The weed material that's in there, the native weeds tend to take it over very quickly. So it's something that we're going to maintain in specific areas because we have the ability to. This happens to be a snowmobile trail that's used throughout the season as a multi-use trail as well. So we mow that trail just to keep it from coming up into thigh-high grass in sections. And since we're already running a small tractor with a brush hog in there, we thought all 3 of these are on the trail. We'll go ahead and maintain and try to maintain them for the wildlife benefits as well. One of the other projects that's going on the Potomac and the Garrett, actually the Garrett State Forest, I guess specifically, goes back to somebody, folks, Ken, you guys were doing the woodcock listening points. I know they were doing some at Green Ridge. We worked out a project over on the Garrett State Forests with the Garrett College. And we have about 25 areas that we identified on the Garrett State Forest that meet that 1/4 acre to 1/2 acre opening, or much bigger in some cases, that are areas that we felt were singing grounds, suitable singing grounds for woodcock. We took Tom's woodcock management plan, we went through there and found the recipe and said, well, you got to have certain size singing grounds close enough to all those habitat needs, roosting, nesting, feeding, etc. And we found about 25 areas that met that criteria. They fell in those areas, and we said, well, these are suitable singing grounds, and they're probably nesting areas, but we don't really know for sure. So we set up a survey, and we've been doing this monitoring now for 4 years. And what we've got is identified 25 individual spots, laid them out into a half a dozen, 5 different routes I think we have. And they can be monitored by one individual in that last hour or so of twilight using the woodcock monitoring protocols. You do your listening points right there. What is it, Tom? The hour before at twilight? What is it? Okay, right there. It's that kind of a window, half hour before and a half hour after, and in twilight hours. And we used their guidelines and said, all right, in order to do that, they have to have this set out. We can make about 3 stops per unit. And we've got students from Garrett College that have been participating. And the chapter has been paying them. In some parts, we've partnered up. It's been drummer fund, and sometimes the chapter has paid. But we've reached out to, this is the kicker on this. This is the biggest value. We've reached out to future wildlife management students. They're actually wildlife management students now, are future biologists. They're going to a 2-year program, Natural Resources and Wildlife Technologies. How many of those do you expect hunt today? Jim, where are you?
About half.
About half are hunters. What was it when you were in school?
90%.
Okay, 90% of the folks in those programs were hunting. About half aren't hunters today. They're taking wildlife management as a career path. What do you think they're going to be advocates for hunting? Not necessarily, unless they get some positive exposure. This gives some great positive exposure to those non-hunters. They're going out, they're doing monitoring of woodcock. Let's face it, they're a pretty charismatic little critter to watch. They're monitoring it, and they're coming back with data to us. They're getting a check from RGS that helps them get through college. They've made a contact not only with a conservation organization that's pro-hunting, but also with the Department of Natural Resources folks that may be future employers, as well as mentors. Comes out with a pretty neat opportunity for them to work with us and this group. We get some good data, and then from that, we're trying to direct some of our management work. Here's a number of the listening points throughout the state forest. If you look, you can see there is some, most of the listening points have good habitat matrix and mix around. There's a large wetland community in here. We have a wetland up at the Hutton Tract. It's a listening points. Typically, in the last 4 years, we've had birds on that particular site. This is above our the Harrington Manor Lake area. This is the Garrett State Forest. Incidentally, was an area that when they did a lot of that, the rough grouse, Appalachian rough grouse management plan, they were doing a lot of their collections up in here. This was an excellent habitat. It's starting to grow out right now, but as you can see, we have a matrix of harvests in there already. We have a food plot that's maintained. In fact, we'll continue. That's actually planted with clover last spring. A couple other listening points. This happens to be a listening point on private land, recognizing that a lot of our habitat niches aren't going to necessarily occur on the state forest. It may be a partnering, if you will. The field is on the private land, the singing ground, but there's no early successional habitat right there. We're creating the early successional habitat adjacent to it on state land. So that's one of the things that we're doing, and it's worked out really well. We'll start to do that again this year with the group. We have started to redirect some of the planting, or not the planting, but the management plan harvests around some of the data collected. In fact, last year we had one of our listening points. Let me think if it's on this. It's on. No, it's not. It's not on that. Yes, it is. It's this lowest one in the corner here. This particular listening point, actually, you see the small little field in the bottom, the little dark, the blonde area in the center. That field is a listening point. If you went on out to the far side of the photograph, it would take you up there on the edge of there's a road up there, and we had a harvest off the edge of that road. In fact, you can see it in the picture here just a little bit. It was thin many years ago, right in here. We regenerated that stand, did a clear cut in there as a follow-up to the prior thinning. And the kid doing the monitoring right there parked his truck at the landing and picked up birds singing on the landing. Brand spanking new habitat. They're using that landing as a singing ground as well as down in the bottom. That timber harvest that was done, and it's starting to regenerate. It's going to create new habitat. It's kind of exciting stuff. And of course, with that particular that project, our goal is more peeps on the ground. We're looking for a successful nesting and helping meet the habitat needs for that. And we want to make a good day in the field for our bird hunters out there. Sir?
You did 3 years of collection now on the survey.
Mm-hmm.
What have you said? Any trends? Any results?
Tom, it's been kind of hard to say a trend. We're picking up regularly. Some of the sites we have had all 4 years. This is 4th year. 3 years, we've got several sites that did hit with birds regularly. The area that we did the harvest in, for example, that's the salting grounds. It's had birds in it regularly. We have a couple of areas that we picked up birds 1 year and not other years. And I guess what I was hoping to see after a period of time is maybe we would go back to some of those areas that didn't get hit regularly by singing birds. And when we're doing our monitoring is in the latter part of the courtship series there, late April, May, and with the expectation that those birds, we know we start singing birds. We see singing birds up in Garrett County, February 28th, 1st of March. But by April and May, what you see in there, those are considered our breeding birds, right? They're likely to nest. And the birds that we're seeing up there on those regular sites, I suppose, have successfully nested. I don't know. They're nesters. So a pattern, what I was hoping to do is start to go and do development projects around those sites that maybe only hit once or twice and weren't utilized as courtship areas. I need to sit with you and Rick. We're getting some data together and kind of analyze the information that we have and help make us to direct what we should do with that, Tom. But that was kind of what I was thinking. Maybe why they didn't use the others, they're smaller openings and not conducive really to good singing grounds. Maybe they need to be enlarged a little bit, or it's possible that the habitat nearby just isn't suitable yet. Any questions or comments about the state forest and the management planning? I'd be glad to field real quick. All right.
I have a quick comment on when John said that it takes a year and a half for what they put on paper to then be able to get that plan into place. One thing with the drummer funds is if your project, you put in for a project proposal that, the plug.
Yeah.
You gotta get the